Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today it is April 26th, which in the film and creature world is Alien Day. So today we're going to be drawing a Xenomorph. I haven't drawn a Xenomorph since almost the beginning of my drawing journey, so it's going to be fun to revisit. Leave a comment below recommending any characters from games, films, or other forms of media you might like to see drawn. And let's get into it. What I've got going here actually isn't a xenomorph in the true sense of the word. It is a neomorph, which is from the Alien Covenant film. And this is maybe a bit of a controversial take, but I actually really love the neomorph. I think it's such a cool take on the xenomorph, and I don't know, this design language kind of speaks to me. It's a little closer to humans, it's much more fleshy, less biomechanical, and it makes sense for the movie that it appears in. And when things relate to humans, particularly creatures, I always think it adds an additional layer of horror because it has this sort of uncanny or closeness effect that we don't really always get when we just look at an alien. But there's something looking at a neomorph, you realize it's a twisted form of a human once again. And the xenomorph has that going for it too, but I thought it was about time to iterate when they did, and I think it's worth better. And I also think that I love the chest burster scene from the original Alien movie, and the subsequent movies, of course. I just kind of love anything Alien film franchise. But the back burster scene is so cool and such a good take. I didn't do anything special here. I'm just pretty much copying or cropping a concept art that was created for the movie and going with that. I didn't want to spend too much time creating my own drawing or anything like that. And by drawing, I mean composition. I just wanted to get into it and start making a monster. Alien came out back in the day in 1979 on May 25th, and it launched at Seattle International Film Festival, which I am from Western Washington, and I have actually been to SIFF. When I went to SIFF, it was like 2009 or 2010, and I went and saw a John Carpenter movie called The Ward, which has Amber Heard in it. I don't remember too much about it. I just remember thinking it was just kind of a cool experience to be there. My brother is a film school graduate from the University of Washington, and films have always mattered to us. So I was just happy to be there and kind of felt like you're seeing things that are not going to really be out for a while. I'm going to use the brush here and just flatten this out. I just wanted to brush on and make it go a little more quickly. So I use my powdered charcoal that I've sanded up from a stick. Try and make it somewhat uniform. Create that kind of jaw hollow shape there for this being we'll say that's the cheekbone right here. What's kind of the perverted version of a cheekbone. But Alien, of course, for someone like me who draws what I draw, Alien's a pretty big deal in my film universe. Probably the biggest deal, really. Get some teeth going here. And what I love about Alien is just the whole vision is so cohesive and put together, from the character design to its life cycle to the original sort of crop of stories that existed around it, especially at the time in which it was done. I just think it's hard to beat what Alien brought to the table. And I still think it is, as far as a creature horror goes. It is the undefinable horror that exists out there. The Alien script was written by a guy named Dan O'Bannon. I think that's his name. And when he was in film school, he had made a movie with an alien in it, not a xenomorph. And I think it was like a beach ball that he had to paint and use, and he was left feeling pretty disappointed after that experience and wanting to make a real alien type of movie. And so he spent some time in the film industry, I guess, and developed a script. And eventually the movie got picked up and passed along, and Ridley Scott, who is now very well known, not so much so at the time, landed the directorial job. Now, 2 years prior, a art book was produced for a fella named H.R. Geiger, Hans Rudy Geiger. I don't know if I'm saying that right. The Rudy part. I might not even be saying Geiger right. I've heard people say Giger before. And Dan O'Bannon happened to be a fan of it. And so by the time Ridley Scott got the script, Dan O'Bannon sort of handed this book off to him and like, look, I think we can base something off of this creation here. And in the book, it's called Necronomicon, there is kind of a painting. It looks quite similar to the Xenomorph. So, of course, they reached out to Geiger and got him going on some concept art. And the rest is pretty much history. You know, it's kind of funny, like 10 years ago, probably when I was most into Geiger stuff, I really wanted to get Necronomicon. So I was looking at it at the time, and it was like kind of expensive. It was like $60. And I was like, I won't do it. And I decided, I check intermittently, but I decided to check again today, since I knew I was going to be doing a Xenomorph drawing. And I think they're now listing for like $200 to $300 for the hardcover. So it would have been a reasonable investment to sort of go into. But, you know, it is what it is. But what Geiger really brought to the table in his art is this unique blend of human and machine. It looks almost joyless or torturous, you know. It's a infusing of humanity with a sort of cold, dark aesthetic of machines. And yeah, there is some sort of relationship always going on there, but it doesn't look nice or kind or pleasant. It looks pretty terrible usually. And so, you know, I could see where, looking at that, especially at the time, that looked like some sort of view into the future. And even still, I'd say it pretty much rings true. Like, humans have become more and more bonded to machinery, obviously, or technology at least. It's not always for the worst, but as far as writing a story goes, it's not a bad place to start, is to make it seem as though it's for the worst. Bannon had given Ridley Scott the Necronomicon, and Scott saw it and knew that he had to bring him on, pretty much. And I think some of the coolest parts about the Xenomorph isn't even so much the Geiger aspect of it, the art aspect. Of course, it's really cool and it's really memorable, but I think honestly what might be most memorable is the way in which the Xenomorph moves through its life cycle. And a good bit of that can be attributed to the fact that Bannon, I believe, had Crohn's disease, and that kind of influenced his opinion on pain in the midsection and whatnot. And I don't know if this encouraged him to seek out a mechanism for that, or if he just already knew. But the Xenomorph and its life cycle gets most of its information from the parasitic wasp, which, upon researching this thing, you would come to the conclusion that it's almost the exact lifestyle or life cycle of the Xenomorph. And parasitic wasps are pretty creepy, obviously. So, much like the alien, they need to find a host so that their young can gestate properly. And it can be a lot of things like spiders or caterpillars. And so this parasitic wasp, which has a rather lanky look, it has like big curled up antennae. They kind of stalk their prey and then eventually make their move and inject themselves into the body of their prey. And maybe die for it, or die trying. Caterpillars and spiders are obviously pretty formidable in that world. But once it's happened, it's happened. And the creature that is hosting it doesn't necessarily know that there's something growing inside of it. It doesn't have that humanity type of knowledge like we would. And so over the course of a couple weeks, the egg gestates inside the creature that's been afflicted, until finally it's ready to wake up. And when it wants to do so, it releases a paralyzing agent. And then the larvae, which have evolved over time and have these kind of mandibles, they end up chewing their way out of the host. And it's pretty grotesque. There's some videos on it online if you wanted to see on YouTube. And I'm sure that, much like me, maybe you kind of thought one egg gets injected into the host, but it is not that. That'd be too kind. It can be like up to 50, and so then all of a sudden all these larvae are pushing out of the body. Like I said, this can be done to spiders too, but the videos that I've seen before are generally then we have caterpillars, which are pretty big, so maybe they can host more than a spider could. But once that's happened, the caterpillar kind of wakes back up, and it starts being almost maternal to these larvae or pupa or whatever that are hanging out there, and it starts spinning its silk and covering them up to protect them. And so they'll stay living in this silk for a bit, and meanwhile the caterpillar will use its life to try and defend them from any sort of predators. It's pretty much lost all autonomy. It's no longer doing what's best for it. And in fact, it'll most likely just die by starving to death because it's not taking care of itself anymore. And then the wasps wake up, a whole bunch of them. And I talk about all this process because I think when we do art, especially if we want to make creatures and the kind of the cool stuff that idealized job that we might want, we think we gotta create something new or something that's never been seen or done before. And the more and more I dive into kind of learning how to make my own creations, the more I realize that having a foundation in our real world is the best way to make something feel real. And I think that's important. I think it needs to feel real and almost familiar. Because once that's the case, we kind of have a basis for our fear. We can work on blending teeth. I think adding realism to the teeth. This is such a messy drawing. I don't know why. I've now done this twice. For a while I would constantly do this where I'd brush on the charcoal. But I was kind of just doing impressionistic or moodier like portraits. And the more creature stuff I do, I realize I need the precision. So I'd be better off just shading it myself. Because, now I'm dragging charcoal around everywhere, but it is what it is. I'm probably going to walk away with kind of a disappointing Xenomorph when all is said and done. I'm usually able to recover a little bit, but definitely kind of challenging using some sort of probably 3D modeling type of reference where they are able to blast in all these crazy veins and textures and highlights. So I'm going to just try and simplify, figure out the shapes I think maybe make it most important and looking like a creature. Now the new Alien films, kind of the Prometheus, Covenant variety, are really not enjoyed by a lot of die-hard alien people. And I do understand why. Having said that, I do think that they are fun horror movies. And I'm not sure the series could really continue on just kind of bringing back a Xenomorph again and again and again. Of course, everyone likes that alien design. But that's the hard part about any beloved franchise is that the conclusions or answers that are finally given often disappoint people. That's why our favorite series tend to fall off, and the premise is often much better than the result. And I can see how Prometheus and Covenant and all that would be, they maybe come across as a little pretentious or too derivative of religion. And that could, make for a dissatisfying answer to the mysteries that were presented when we saw the engineers. And because in Prometheus they essentially just end up being proto-humans, or maybe angels. It's kind of one and the same there. Use the brush to knock down here and keep giving more and more. Try and start extracting some shape. Right now that's just a big blotch, and I'm going to have to do a lot of work to get some details going. Make this part bright as this kind of going to help. So the light source is kind of coming top down here. Alright guys, that's going to do it for now. I'll check back in if it looks like it's going in a favorable direction, but if not, thanks for listening to me ramble about why I love Alien so much and its makers. And so hopefully you drew something as well, maybe a Xenomorph, maybe just a sketch instead of trying to shade a big monstrosity. But I appreciate you guys watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.